Thank you all for joining us and welcome to our Excite Institute XR Speaker Series. We are so thrilled today to host Sarah Ticho. And this talk is going to be hosted by Nathalie Mathe at our Oakland campus. So I'm going to turn it over to you. Take it away.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm really pleased to have Sarah today present her groundbreaking work. Sarah is a multi-award winning artist, strategist, entrepreneur, and change maker, and she operates at the intersection of health, well-being, and immersive storytelling. She directs and produces the XR experience Soulpen that she's presenting today. It's narrated by the actor and activist Rosario Dawson, and the piece has garnered international acclaim, including South by Southwest Special Jury Prize in the competition and Best Health and Wellness at the Games for Change Awards, and the Creative Cultural Advocacy Prize for the Social Impact in Media Awards. So welcome, Sarah, and I'm looking forward to hear all the details about Soulpens.
Oh, thank you so much for the lovely introduction, and thank you so much for having me here. I think that moments like this are really helpful to actually condense what the heck we've been doing and trying to turn it into a useful narrative. And hopefully, I think today I'd love to just share a little bit about the work that I've been doing, and I guess some of the learnings that perhaps can benefit other people as well, and support other students in working out what they want to make and why as well. So yeah, today I'm just going to talk a little bit about the journey of making Soul Paint, and that this is how unexpected this was as a career move. And I guess, the process of making something that really sits between the intersection of immersive storytelling and health and well-being and impact. I know everyone now is talking about impact in XR, whatever that means. So please do ask questions throughout. I know that also lots of students are not able to be here in the live talk, so also really invite anyone that has any questions, thoughts, feedback to reach out as well. So with that, I guess I'll dive in. So yes, I think I've had such a lovely introduction already. But hi, my name's Sarah. I do lots of different things. It was very accidental. As just to give you a bit of a sense of my background, I studied anthropology at university. So I think I've always just found people very interesting. So I really studied the intersection of social anthropology and biological anthropology. And I think it's only once you get further down in life that you realise that it all kind of makes sense in the end. But it was actually just as I was finishing my degree, and in that weird moment where it's like, oh, what do I actually do with my life, that my dad became quite unwell and ended up passing away very quickly of pancreatic cancer. And it was, a horrible and weird time, particularly when all of life kind of felt like it was being really reframed anyway. And being British, as you may be able to tell from the accent, I live in a place called Brighton in the southeast. I think I grew up in a culture of not talking about things. And it was only a few years later that I ended up getting quite unwell myself, and became really interested in how can we find new ways to talk about experience. And I've started to find myself being really drawn to the arts. And it was actually around that time that a good friend's mum, she was the director of this gallery, and said, why don't you just volunteer with us? And so I think my introduction to immersive art was actually standing and volunteering in this gallery in Brighton. It's a place called Fabrica, which is a former Regency church, where they ripped out all the pews and they would commission all of these site-specific installations. And so this is an amazing piece by an artist called Karina Kaikonen. And it was all about grief and loss. And I just stood there in that gallery, and people would just tell me what it meant to them. And I just remember this dad that came there with his son. He was just playing with all of these shirts, and everyone had contributed their own shirts to the piece, all us volunteers. I think mine is just this one here in the corner. And we all felt like we were a part of it, that we contributed our own personal stories to this piece. But it gave people permission to talk about something that's really hard to talk about. And that's where I was like, oh wow, like art isn't just for like wealthy people that speak this language that I don't speak, but it's a way of bringing people together. And I think that's ended up being a thread through lots of this work as well. And so I started to work in Fabrica for a little bit, and then I started to work in film as well. And it was like a year or so later, I ended up becoming, like I mentioned, quite unwell. I was traveling alone and ended up having a psychotic episode, as the doctors called it. And I think a lot of it was perhaps due to kind of not actually addressing a lot of the difficult feelings I had. And coming back to Brighton, and I remember sitting in a doctor's office and just asking for help. And I remember they gave me like 5 different bits of paper with different types of medication and said, take your pick. And I was given this code F30.2, and it just felt so unbelievably dehumanizing. It felt like, I think I often talk about the idea of like the doctor's office of this performance space, that you have to explain how you feel when perhaps you don't always have the words to explain how you feel. There was a study that found that on average you have about 11 seconds to explain how you feel to a care professional before you'll probably be interrupted. That is, let alone if you are a woman or a person of colour or a child, or if you're going through menopause. Like, there's so many different ways that people can be dismissed. And so that's where I first became really interested in the role of virtual reality. That I remember trying to explain this idea that with the experience I had, it felt like being 2 places at once, that I knew the world that had always existed and this world that I was sort of experiencing at that time. And how do you make both of them true and keeping yourself safe? And so that was sort of initially my journey in, of just being kind of fascinated in how can you tell different people's stories. And this was about 2016 that I really started to get sort of interested in this work. And so I actually ended up moving to Australia for a little bit, and I became a curator at a festival called the Big Anxiety Festival. And it was there that I first started showing work and became really interested in artists that were making work about their own experience of mental health using VR, but also artists that were using VR therapeutically. And this fascinates me, that you can use immersive storytelling to reduce pain or anxiety, or even teach clinical skills, or how to communicate with patients using immersive technology. I'm sure many of you are very familiar with these applications, but I was like, why is no one talking about this? And so I really love sort of showcasing that work and running events and bringing together sort of artists and scientists to sort of have discussions about how can we co-create things that can be useful, but also where do they belong and where do they sit as well. So initially that was going to be a PhD. That didn't quite happen, and but then I ended up spending some time over in California briefly, and ended up working under this fascinating researcher. Don't worry, this all kind of comes together and makes sense in the end. But a fascinating researcher over at Stanford called Tanya Luhrmann. She wrote a book called When God Talks Back, and was doing this cross-cultural research study called Spiritual Curiosity in the Mind, where they were looking at different Christians around the world and asking them, have you ever met God? What did that smell like, look like, taste like? How do these extraordinary experiences sort of manifest in the body? And it sort of drove forward this sort of curiosity of how can we learn about like how extraordinary sensory experiences manifest. But I found it kind of fascinating and frustrating because I was just doing all these surveys and just asking people questions about like, yeah, what does God smell like? How do you even describe that? And it felt like this similar thing of there's all these very intangible human experiences that can be really hard to put into words or put on a scale of 1 to 10. But also being in Silicon Valley, it was where I was learning more and more about VR and the different ways that it was being used. Stanford have the Psychiatry and Immersive Technology Consortium that also do a lot of work to bring together people. So it was there that I really started like percolating on some of these ideas. So none of the kind of ideas for Soul Paint happened overnight, but it was kind of bringing together all these things that kind of fascinated me. And over the years, I've also continued to show different exhibitions and I think showcase other people's work that's really sort of in this space as well. So this was an exhibition where I showed a series of different immersive works as well here in Brighton a few years ago called Embodied Realities that was looking at how artists, again, are kind of exploring this space. And alongside this work, I've also been very frustrated by the fact that there's a real lack of uptake in the kind of wider healthcare sector as well. I live in the UK, which is obviously very different to where lots of you guys are, but there's still a lot of great work that happens in silos and great case studies of how, you know, VR might be used for pain management in one place or exposure therapy for people with phobias in another. But there's a real lack of infrastructure as well. So over the years, when even just thinking about making this project, I was like, what's the point if it doesn't actually reach anyone? So I also do a lot of policy work in this space as well, which has been extremely educational and also helped pay the bills as well over the years. So it's been nice to kind of, survive and learn at the same time. In 2020, we wrote this report called The Growing Value of XR in Healthcare in the UK that led to a large government investment of about £20 million to support the development and distribution of this work in the UK. And then in November of last year, we also released this report as well, which is a landscape map of the distribution of work and products that are in the UK. And that includes in hospitals, through universities and different companies, and looking at like what is missing and what is needed for this work to thrive. Because even though it's a very technology first approach, as I'm sure many of you know, there are a lot of barriers to even just like deploying this technology in the first place, and then thinking about what work needs to reach people and how. So that's been another little facet. So anyway, that's a bit of the background, but I think that the theme throughout all of this and what really fascinates me and why I think immersive technology is so fascinating is that it's a really powerful tool for reconnection. We can digitize existing approaches like cognitive behavioral therapy in VR. We can gamify things, which is a whole other talk of why I have issues around gamification. But I think what is at the center of what makes me continue to work in the space is how you can bring together the body and enable people to experience things with their whole body to create this sense of presence when we live in this insane world of second screen viewing, and how to give people agency to tell stories in different ways. And I think that's why I really love Soul Paint and why I want to talk to you a little bit about what the heck I've been making for a decade now. And so Soul Paint is a virtual reality experience that asks you this question: where are you feeling? And it started back when I was working at the Big Anxiety Festival that I met in Australia, that I met this arts and health researcher called Catherine Boydell, who first introduced me to it. And it is a beautiful technique that is so simple at its core. And traditionally, you're invited to trace around your body on a large piece of paper and go through a mindfulness experience, mindfulness sort of facilitation, usually facilitated by somebody else. And you do a body scan and just notice, where in my body do I feel today? Right now, well, I've been cycling this afternoon, so I got quite sore legs from cycling up a lot of hills. I still get nervous doing public speaking, so I can feel it in my chest. It's really cold, so I've got really cold toes. I think my period's about to start, so I can feel that in my stomach as well. And there's all these different feelings and sensations that perhaps we're not always attuned to. But just this process of being aware and bring it into the mind, and then imagining, what colour does that sensation have? What texture does it have? And there's something about that sort of onboarding that gives everyone has this very deep, innate synesthesia-like ability to say, it's here and it's purple and it fizzes and it burns and it aches. and it felt like discovering fire. It's like, why is no one talking about this as like a concept all the time? And so I loved it as a process, but felt deeply frustrated by my own inability to draw things that looked really epic, essentially. But around that time, I tried Tilt Brush, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with Tilt Brush and other 3D drawing experiences out there, where I was like, yeah, you can paint with fire and electricity and water. And isn't that amazing? And of course, we as bodies are spatial, like we're not just 2D outlines, but I want to draw on the skin and outside the body and inside the body. And so, the initial idea was like, oh, this is really simple. Just get a little model and put it in VR and like, that's it, right? And 10 years later, I've realized that it's much more complicated than that. But that was the initial kernel of the idea. And so I'm just going to talk a little bit about like the different aspects of the process. I'm skipping over lots of the timeline for now, just because that's not probably very useful to you guys. But over the years, I've been collaborating with my co-director, Nikki Smit, who's an incredible games director from the Netherlands, who runs a company called Monobanda. And together we started to look at like all these different challenges of what does it mean to bring body mapping into virtual reality. So first of all, you need a body, right? We need to bring you into that world. And what kind of body do we bring into that world? How do we represent you when lots of different people have different shapes and identities? And so this was a real challenge when it felt like that process of the body scan and the outline of you felt really important. So we went through this big process of like, maybe we should abstract the body. And so these were some initial ideas. We were like, what about if we made the body like a universe, like a cosmos, this idea of like infiniteness? How could we represent that? So we did lots of user testing and people were like, oh, that's really scary. I don't like this idea of seeing a sort of shadow self. So we were like, all right, let's can that. And then I remember we were collaborating with some eating disorders researchers, and we went and took it to an eating disorders conference. And we just played with the idea of like chunkiness. How thick do we make someone's body? And maybe we give them choices at the beginning. And we realized that even just with the idea of just getting people to evaluate what they look like from the outside was immediately off-putting, because what we're trying to do in this piece is get you to think about what is happening in your inner world. And so we had to can that immediately. So it was this long process of, how does that fit? And how do we want to represent you within that? So I'll tell you more about what we landed on, but that was one of our sort of research questions along the way. And then another question was like, what do we want to ask people to explore? This joy of body mapping as a process is that it's facilitated in lots of different ways. It could be around your experience of psychosis or pain or menopause, or, hey, what does it feel like falling in love? Or, what does it feel like to meet your niece for the first time? And so I just started to show it to friends, and I made a very early prototype, and I just shared it with one of my oldest friends who I've known since I was 3 years old, who's got quite severe eating disorders. And this is sort of an image of an early prototype. And at first I was like, hey, just draw how you feel on a good day. Why don't we try that? And she drew this image on the left. And as you can see, it's kind of things swirling around her. And she talks about this feeling of like wholeness. And then she was like, I really want to draw my experience of body dysmorphia. And she then drew the second image that you can see on the right, where she'd scribbled out her face, just started drawing this swirling in her stomach. And then she drew all these arrows. And I was asking her, like, what do these arrows mean to you? And she said that, when she goes outside, she always feels like people are staring at her, and that she just doesn't feel comfortable even being outside. And I think this was a really big moment quite early on of like, oh my gosh, I'm really seeing someone that I know in a very different way. And that these are two very different images side by side. And what does it mean to also collect these different images and think about how this could be applied as a way to support communication between people? And she talked about this idea of like this fragmentation in the body, that when she's regarding her body dysmorphia, that she becomes almost like a collection of objects. And so there was this moment of like, are we making a therapy piece? Are we making an art tool? Like, I don't really know what this is, but I don't feel qualified to do this, which is how I ended up doing a lot of end-of-life doula training, which is probably a conversation for another day, but was kind of interested in like, what is the role of the facilitator in real life in supporting people through this as well. But she ended up actually working with us on some of the avatar design in the end, and this is just an example of like how some of the how the avatar is represented in the piece. It doesn't convey very well over screen, but in the VR piece we decided to actually make that body out of smoke. So as you move around, the body shape almost starts shifting and changing. And so we wanted to make something that is more ethereal. So we're never saying this represents you, but an abstraction of you. And then these are the sort of drawings that you then get to put over it in the end as well. But yeah, it doesn't quite do it justice here. But over the years, I've been such a research nerd, and there's so much fascinating science out there about the different ways that VR can be really impactful when understanding the self and self-perception. I'm sure many of you are very familiar with, or may not be familiar with, the work of Mel Slater, who's done some really fascinating work around this idea of the body transfer illusion. And he made a fascinating piece called Freud Me that I really recommend looking into, around this idea of externalizing yourself in a virtual environment. So in Freud Me, as it was originally called, then you would explain all your problems to Freud in a virtual environment. Then you would swap bodies with Freud, and then hear yourself being told your problems before being invited to give yourself advice, and then you swap bodies again and then hear it back. And I'm so fascinated by this idea of creating an embodied perspective on yourself. And so this was like a really core part of the development of like, what does it mean not just to represent yourself in a different way and perhaps paint how you feel, but how can it also transform your self-perception as well? So that became another research question as part of the process as well. But one of the big moments where Nikki and I first started really collaborating was that he made this piece called Copy Paste Dance, and as part of this research project called Kinesthetics. And we also just started to ask this other question of, hey, what would it mean to also dance with your sadness as well? That we're talking about how we visualize our inner experience in a different way, but also VR is such a deeply embodied medium, and how can we use dance and movement to really expand the potential expressiveness of the piece? And that's when we were like, okay, now we really need to start working together as well. And of course, there's actually a lot of research that shows that, of course, we know that things like dance and movement are really transformative, but actually research has found that combining expressive body movements with journaling actually can increase your health and well-being and create a higher GPA and make you feel happier and healthier. So we were like, cool, here's another kind of factor to put into whatever the heck we're making. And so we went through this long journey of sort of trying to develop this, but also we knew that we didn't know a lot as well. So over the years, we've also been hassling all sorts of researchers and scientists that have many of them kind of dedicated time in kind to help us work out what we're making and how can we embed the science and research into what we were making. We still weren't sure if we were making an art piece or a science piece or a research tool, but it was really helpful to think about how we could bring together different artists and scientists into the process. One of our other big questions was around, is this just something that people do by themselves? How do you share it with others? And it was actually at one of our scientific advisory days that Sarah Garfinkel, who's an incredible neuroscientist, also said, you know, there's also therapeutic value in seeing your story in the context of others. So another big part, another big part of our kind of development or research questions was, how do we also shift this story from an I to a we? How do we think about collective storytelling as well? And so we were like, cool, we've got some ideas. Let's do some initial development. And we started to create the piece. And just as we were thinking that we might be nearly finished, we applied for some additional research funding and worked with Story Futures Academy, which are here in the UK. And we did some of our testing in a library. And this was super, super helpful because we started to have real assumptions about what we were making. But I think the challenge of being an immersive maker is that you show your work in festivals and contexts with other people that really get the medium. And what we were doing is we were showing our work in progress to people that had never used VR before. And it was so painful. And we realized that a lot of what we'd done did not work. And so this was a really helpful process to get feedback, not just on the story, but also on the usability and the user experience, and really helped us refine like where we felt like this worked as well. So what we did is we had a pilot in a library for 2 weeks. We trained up docents. We thought about how the work was physically presented in the space, and gathered lots and lots of feedback. And then we also set it up in a school as well and tried it with young people who responded in an amazing way as well. We especially had like loads of like teenage boys saying, oh, I love this idea of like drawing how you feel. Like I would do this instead of like having a diary or something. So that was very, very helpful as part of the process as well. And then we were like, okay, we need to finish this. How the heck are we going to do that? But we did. And it was summer 2023. And our producer was like, South by Southwest is coming up. Maybe we can finish it by that. And I was like, I don't know, this doesn't really feel done. But we decided to go for it and we finished the piece. And I'm just going to share a little trailer of what we created.
Have you ever noticed where you feel? Everyone has a hidden story. This is a chance to explore yours. An experience that brings together art and science to reveal the infinite and complex worlds of feeling hidden within us all. Soul paint. Where are you feeling?
So, in a remarkable change of events, we also bagged Rosario Dawson to be the voice of the piece, which is wild and a whole other story. But we are really, really lucky to bring her on board in the 11th hour. She was a judge on Unity for Humanity, which is where we got some funding from. And so she is the voice of the piece. So now to actually tell you what we did finally make. So you put on the headset and you get invited into this world. Rosario sets the context and says, hey, have you ever noticed where you feel? Inside of you is a universe of thoughts, feelings and emotions that can sometimes feel impossible to express or make sense of. Our butterflies dance in our stomachs, our spines tingle. And then she starts to show you how to use the tools. So we give you a palette and a brush. We show you how to use your voice. And then we trace your body in the mirror. So as you breathe slowly and deeply, this body appears in front of you. And we play with this idea of the body and transfer illusion, that we show yourself in the mirror and that it's clearly yours before you then step through the mirror. And as you do that, you start to almost decouple from this avatar and it becomes your canvas to draw upon. And so we ask you this question of like, hey, how do you feel today? Or perhaps there's a memory you'd like to explore. That as part of that library research, we found that people just wanted to bring whatever they wanted to bring. And we give them permission to just say, do whatever you want to do. And it's really up to you how deep or shallow you want to go. So you make your own drawing using different colours and textures before you then describe what it means to you as well. So you get invited to explain it using the microphone. Then you get invited to step back into your avatar. So you get to physically wear it and you see it in the mirror, moving and reacting to your movements. So there's this real aspect of play and surprise. And again, it's not totally conveyed here, but there's this real sort of sensory, playful aspect where as you move, it responds in different ways. Before you're then invited to shake it all off. And so this was part of the research that we did with this somatic theatre maker around like, actually, how do we maybe transform our relationships with different feelings? And that in the animal kingdom, particularly when animals go through stressful things, they literally shake it off. Taylor Swift had a point here. And so you see all of these brushes fall away from you. And as that happens, the cocoon you're in breaks open. And Rosario says, imagine if you could see each of those around you, each with a story as vivid and complex as your own. And you get to hear other people's stories as well. So this is not from in the VR experience. I'll explain a bit more in a moment sort of what this is. But what we've done is we've created this sort of ever-expanding archive of stories around love and heartbreak and pain and friendship and grief. And you get to hear all those different stories, as well as deciding if you want to share your audio story with that as well. So I'm just going to share a couple of stories that have been shared within this, because I think it probably helps it all come together a bit as well.
Oh man, I should give this to my visual therapist. So I have an inflamed shoulder, and I decided to draw that because some muscle in my neck or shoulder is being cut off, and that sort of puts pressure on my whole arm. So I drew these sort of fiery red paint strokes through my arm, and there's this pulsating feeling, this tingling feeling of blood circulation being cut off. At least that's what it feels like. And then I had this for 2 weeks now, so I'm on a lot of painkillers, and they make me feel drowsy, and they give me a lot of pain in my stomach because it's I think it's more painkillers than my stomach can handle. But yeah, that's what I drew. My damn shoulder. I'm getting old.
And then here's another story from a person whose voice you may also recognise.
This week was the 11-year anniversary of my dad passing away, and I went to the place that reminds me of him, and it just gave me this kind of sinking feeling in my stomach again, like this infinite hole of sadness. I felt very anxious that day and could feel my heart beating and all the thoughts running around my head, and I think it still really hurts, and being there and surrounded by lots of the memories kind of reminded me how grateful I am to be alive, but that it feels like this big piece of my life is still very much missing.
It still feels insane to share this publicly, and this was never part of the plan at all. I felt like I wanted to, well, we had to do a lot of testing ourselves, and I wanted to try and use it in a way that felt authentic rather than being like, oh, the brush is working. And there was a point where, I didn't even realize the recording functionality was working at that point. And I put this in here, and then Nikki was like, oh my God, I heard your story. And I was like, what? He was like, yeah, about your dad. And I was like, did you? And I felt really embarrassed and was like, oh, that wasn't meant to be for anyone. And it was just as we were finishing the piece that he was like, I think you should put it in. And I was like, oh, you don't know. I don't think I can do that. And I did. And, we've showed this piece to more than 3,000 people, probably 3,500 people. I have got the number somewhere. And a really unexpected part of making this piece is that people come out and then they say like, oh, me too. And I really love VR because it's not just about like the experience that you're giving someone in their headset, but it's like the conversations that come out of it. And, the idea of Soul Paint came from this very personal place, but it was also not meant to be that in a way. And it's been really a lovely part of the journey in a way to have this like shared experience of, again, talking to more people about grief. But it's been extremely kind of validating, and a really special part of it is that I think grief is one of the things that needs to be normalized and discussed more in society. And I'm really glad that that has ended up being a part of it. But these are just some of thousands of stories now that have been shared in Soul Paint. And I've been really kind of fascinated and passionate by like how we can make it more accessible to people, and how we can use this as a way of collecting stories and making them more accessible as well. And so, yeah, we took it on the festival circuit. We premiered at South by Southwest. And like Nathalie kindly shared at the beginning, like, we kind of cleaned up, like, which is mad, because this project, I don't know, for a long time, we couldn't get support from anywhere. All the arts funders were calling it a health project. We couldn't get support from them. All the health funders were saying it was an art project. But we've had a really nice tour of the world, essentially. And we've even taken it to like Downing Street and the United Nations and all sorts of places. But I think that there is a real false economy around the festival circuit, because a lot of the time, I mean, Downing Street was kind of amazing, but you're just showing VR work to other VR people, and it's really hard to graduate out of there. But we had this really wonderful opportunity that just came up recently, where the team at the Lincoln Center invited us to bring Soul Paint there. And at first they were like, hey, just bring it as it is. We've got this space. Let's show that. And we were like, no, we have learnt so much from showing it on the festival scene that we really want to think about ways that we can make this far more accessible. And so that is what we did. So we applied for some extra funding, and we thought about how we can work with the space that we were given, which was in the atrium. We had this kind of private booth set up. So the flow is that you arrive. We had an incredible docent that would sort of onboard you, explain the concept. You could do paper-based body mapping there. We had screens that show you how to interact with it. And then we have this beautiful new wall where this is a live generated piece that showcases all the different artworks of the people that had come through the piece as well. And also, finally, we built in the functionality that means that you can take your digital artwork home, so you can email it to you. So we really wanted to think about how that could be more accessible and not just something that is kind of you see only in that moment as well. And I think at the center of what we wanted to explore is like how we could, ask New Yorkers how they felt. And of course, there are New Yorkers that go to art spaces, but we also wanted to think about how to represent people outside of that as well. So we also went to other different spaces and venues across New York as well. So some of the first places we went before we even opened at the Lincoln Center, we went to Urban Arts, which is an amazing games charity in New York. And then this lovely seniors community as well. We said, we want you to be the first people to try this version, and we want your artworks to be the first artworks that are shown at the Lincoln Center. And so they could bring their families and friends and show their artworks on that big screen as well. And we really wanted to challenge this idea of like, who is this work for and who gets to express it. And I really wanted to share this lovely sort of interview with one of the women afterwards who tried Soul Paint.
Totally removed from the world you just stepped into, like the lack of chaos in seconds. Mm-hmm. The minute the colors come on, and the feeling of the painting, moving your arms and your hands, picking the colors, and the feeling of the painting is very, very healing in a very short period of time.
So it was really lovely, but we still really wanted to, and it's lovely to have that feedback and helpful to think about, how this can be useful. But we also work with scientists and have scientists embedded in our team. And we always want to think about, who is this for? How can we make this better? What is it that resonates, and how can we continue on this journey? So we actually collaborated with more scientists to really look at the impact of the piece. And we wanted to think about like, hey, what is it that resonates with people here? And so I think people are really drawn to this idea of body awareness, how we can connect to others, that immersion and kind of atmosphere that we've created for people is this really kind of gentle place for people to reflect. That some people were intrigued by the technology and the novelty, but actually came out with something very new and different as well, and that people really love that creative expression. But there are still lots of challenges as well. Lots of people aren't familiar with VR, and that there are still challenges with the controls. How people understand how to use them can be really difficult if people have not used it before. This is actually feedback from a previous showing that we did, but we found that the experience felt too short if we had book timing. So in the Lincoln Center version, we actually just had open bookings as well. And that we also really wanted to think about accessibility. And so that's a new element that we've been building in, is things like, how can we have seated versions for this, or subtitles as well? We've also found that people are very self-critical and never felt like their artworks were creative enough. So we've been trying to think about ways to reassure people and sort of onboard them beforehand. But yeah, these were some of the key takeaways that I think people have sort of come away from it, that people are really interested in that connection between the mind and body, how we can be more empathetic towards others. And I think I've sort of touched on those bits already. We also did some quite nerdy research as well. So we started to look at, we had a survey afterwards that we sort of made as part of the narrative. So it was more of a reflection where we really worked with an artist to think about how we can ask people questions in a way that brings home some of the ideas that we presented, whilst also asking them questions. So we found that there was an increase in self-compassion and acceptance towards themselves after exploring the piece, that they felt more connected to others, that it created this awareness of their sensations and feelings in the body. And we're working with the Centre of Inner Experience at Durham to be like, and what sort of inner worlds are you exploring? Is it thoughts or self-talk? Are you exploring imagery, feelings, moods, or sensory aspects as well? So that was quite interesting to find out more about the nature of what people are drawing. And overall, we did see an increase in mood and a reduction in negative feelings. And lastly, we've been working with some really fascinating data scientists to explore what sort of patterns emerge with this spatial data that we're gathering. So can we start to see, if we had, do people in New York draw falling in love in the same way people might in Shanghai or Cape Town? And so what we're starting to do is create this sort of research framework to look at patterns in what people draw. A big part of this process was making sure that people are very clear to what they're consenting to and making a very transparent framework. And that's something that we're still working on, of like, what does authorship mean? And do people really understand how this data is being used? But this isn't for our own sort of nefarious research ideas in the background. Like, the idea is that we keep on embedding these findings as part of the exhibition, and that the science is just as much just as important as the story as well. And lastly, sorry, I think I've talked a bit longer than planned, but I'm really proud to say that we actually had a lot of people that had tried VR very rarely, if not at all before. And so there seemed to be a resonance with lots of different people. So these are just some things that people said about it, which is very nice, but it's still very much a journey of working out where it fits and who it's for as well. So just to reassure lots of you, I'm sure your project won't take as long as mine did. It's taken a good 10 years to get to this point, but and lots of things that didn't work out along the way and things that really did. But hopefully through kind of having workshops and sessions like this, we can share the challenges and pains and things that we've learned, and how we can sort of make it easier for other people as well. So just to wrap it up, this is very much the beginning of the work. I'll probably still be doing this for another 10 years. And we're really thinking about like where this work reaches people. We're carrying on working and seeking out new partnerships with research institutions to think about how it can be applied. We want to make an expanded online version that can be a journaling tool for people. We're expanding it more and more into health and wellness spaces for patients to articulate themselves and have it integrated into therapy, and then think about how it can fit into public engagement as well. So we're sort of challenging what this system of where XR can be. And I think that a lot of not just Soul Paint, but other works is really about breaking down these silos between health, wellness, creativity and community. And I know that we're not alone as well. So we've also just released something called the Playful Care Coalition, where we're also inviting other people that are interested in this space to sort of come together and think about how we can collaborate on making all sorts of projects and distributing them in different contexts globally as well. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you so much for having me. And sorry, I kind of waffled on longer than planned, but hopefully that was useful anyway. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. That was absolutely amazing. And I remember when I first encountered your work, it was just a little thing that you are doing, and then like a few years later it's like, wow, winning all those awards and being at South by Southwest, and yeah, it took times, and I know firsthand because I had similar issues with my own piece with U-turn, and how do you distribute it, how do you really impact people, and what's a viable business model also, because you need to survive when you produce those kind of pieces. So really congratulations. If anyone wants to ask a question, we still have 10 minutes. Masha, Massa? Yeah.
Massa. Thank you so much for the great presentation. It was fascinating. I'm Massa, PhD student here at Northeastern. And I have actually two questions. The first one is, if you published any work around the results of this work, I would really appreciate if you could send us. And also, I want to know your take about using some physiological signals, such as eye tracking, while people are actually interacting with your painting. Because one project that I'm also doing is really close to what you're doing. It's art therapy, body scanning, and we ask people to put colors on a mannequin, and then based on the colors they're choosing, and also some of the eye tracking features like pupil dilation and saccadic movements, I change the colors and add some visual layers on top of the mannequin. So somehow contrasting how they are feeling and how their body is responding to it. So I was wondering if you have any insights on that too.
Great questions. So yeah, just to answer your first one, we do have some published research. We have more that will be coming out. But yeah, some stuff is on our website, and our probably latest thing is that we did a case study with the National Centre for Creative Health that also summarises some of this research. But the challenge has also always been that we got funded as an art project. So we've always funneled in the scientists, but we've never really had formal support. So we've done surveys and things ourselves, but we actually just got ethics clearance a day before we opened it at Lincoln Center, and we now have ethics approval to be able to do studies on every single exhibition that we do going forward. So more on that in the future. And yes, biofeedback is absolutely my happy place, and I'm super fascinated by it. And the way that I met Nikki is that he is the director of a piece called Explore Deep that uses breath in VR. I can also share a link to that in the chat as well, if you're interested in learning about that world as well, because Jo, who's our behavioural researcher on this, also wrote her PhD that is linked on the Deep website around potential of game-based biofeedback interventions for anxiety regulation. So there's a whole universe on that. I think the challenge that we've always found is this sort of space between doing things that can integrate biofeedback and lots of different tech and haptics in all these ways, and just accessibility and being able to say hey, roll up and try this at a festival, and and that it's so complex to integrate it, and it's also how does that make this more meaningful as well. I think the joy of Soul Paint is that it's more about people's subjective visualization of how they feel, and whilst there perhaps could be interesting things that we could do with visualizing internal signals, I think that's not necessarily the guiding light of what it's about. So I would love to do that kind of stuff in the future, but I think it's about like usability, budget, and like the core tenet of it, of what it's about. So would love to do more in the future, but yeah, in comparison to other projects that are out there on the festival circuit, we probably did this on half a quarter of what other people have done. So if anyone wants to experiment with Soul Paint and integrating biofeedback, happy to talk more.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Tome, you want to go next?
Yeah. Hey, how you doing? And hi, Eileen. It's good to see you again. I haven't seen you in a while. So yeah, I just wanted to ask. I noticed one of the slides you had mentioned that y'all have troubles with the controller interaction between users. It's like a hard transition of input, especially for people who don't have traditional VR practice. I was just wondering, what did you think about actually possibly ditching controllers altogether and going for like more of a fully hand track based experience, and how that might change some of the even the meaning around your content based on like how users interact with it? Or if that wasn't an option, what did you think about like more of a hybrid approach? Because I know now there's even technology where a user can use both a controller and their hand at the same time to get input, so that you don't lose too much technical like feasibility and like haptic feedback, but also users cannot freely interact with their physical hand as well. What did you think about that?
Oh, love these questions. They're so great. It was such a journey of thinking about how to make that interaction work. And I think that there's so many people that really nailed it in the past, like, you know, Tilt Brush, like Quill, they've done so many great things. And I was really interested by the potential of hand tracking in lots of ways, but it's I think hand tracking is fine if you're just doing like one brush perhaps, or a couple of different brushes, but it was this huge design challenge that I actually hardly even touched on here around how you give people enough choice as well. Enough choice, but not so much that people are overwhelmed. And I think that's where the palette approach felt like the thing that made the most sense in some ways. I'm trying to find a better way to visualize our brush system. But let me see if I can share this, which may visualize it a bit better. But I think this was the easiest way to give people enough options. Where's that? So being able to just dip. So it took a lot of time to think about how that interaction worked. But yeah, the idea of just being able to dip in and that you could see that being updated felt like the most usable way to do it. And that we have like kind of sonic feedback as well. So when it changes, it's got a bloop bloop and some haptics. So it was trying to find the easiest way to give people those options. And so we've done a lot of work to guide people in a way that it feels smoother. But I'm super interested in other forms of interaction, absolutely. And one of the things that we've been doing recently is, I don't know if I should say this publicly, but well, I can, is we've been reaching out to the people that make those mixed reality pens. So Logitech have these mixed reality pens, and just, you know, the concept of holding a controller but knowing that it's a paintbrush can be quite confusing. The idea of just giving someone a pen and that they can still have their palette, I'm kind of excited by that kind of concept of usability. So I think there's so much that can be done and would love to experiment with more. But yeah, any ideas on ways to make it more accessible, I'm totally here for.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I've actually done a project as well where I've used the Logitech MX Ink, the same pen stylus that you're mentioning, and it was pretty fun to make a painting app like that as well. So.
Did you find it quite intuitive, or what was, how did you feel like sort of integrating it into your work?
Yeah, for my experience, I used it during a hackathon where me and my group wanted to make an application that helped the visually impaired learn to draw if they already haven't. And that was a really big challenge to do. What we found was because at the hackathon there wasn't many visually impaired people who tested our app, we found that they actually just took the MX ink and started drawing in the sky when we wanted them to draw on flat paper. So it was actually a really good user experience that we learned. And I didn't want to restrict people of what they could do because, it's your interpretation of the work as you put it in your project. But yeah, that was what I found. It was very intuitive, it was very easy to set up in the project and also for the user to use, but it was just a little challenging to get them to use it how I wanted them to.
Yeah, I hear that.
Great.
Cool,
Thank
thanks.
you. Let's take one more question. Isabella.
Hi. Hi. Thanks so much, Sarah, for that incredible presentation and yeah, for sharing your story. Just super excited and thanks for all the like leads and points. Yeah, I feel like I could go on and on about all the different things I'm interested in here. But just quickly, background, I went to Northeastern University London to do a digital politics masters. Now I'm starting a PhD at Southampton, and actually the last few things that was said about doing research at festivals, biosensory equipment. So I'm about to do all that at Boomtown Festival this August. I'm also in the UK, yeah. And one of my supervisors at Southampton, she's at the Winchester School of Arts. So I'm just looking into all of this stuff too. But then with the overall like aim or in the field of like political science and specifically deliberative democracy. So how people come together, diverse, yeah, people, but then towards the objective of sort of collective decision making. And up till now in the field, it's all about talking and words and like just the outputs in that sense. But then now with AI and generative AI and LLMs, you're getting these autonomous agents that are non-human. So then I'm trying to bring it back to exactly what it means to be human. And I think this whole embodied experience, emotions, creativity is what's distinctly human. So yeah, I'm actually looking, and so I'd love to share notes, and I've just added you on LinkedIn and everything. But even like using those people as avatars, where people can like join a citizens assembly in VR and express themselves and their emotions like that. And I want to focus on that rather than just what everyone's been saying. So yeah, really, really cool. So really excited by the ways that some of the work that you've been doing can be sort of transferred. So yeah, let's continue conversation at some point. It'd be lovely to chat with you further. Thanks.
Oh, yes, please. Thank you. That's such a, yeah, lovely comment because that's literally what I've been thinking about all afternoon as well as like how can these sorts of things be used in sort of social justice contexts that, there's these decision makers at the top that make decisions on behalf of other people. And how you can bring like lived experience stories into that. And that doesn't necessarily just have to be online, but I love this as a research method, as a way of gathering stories, but it doesn't just need to be shared in digital spaces. I'd also love to share the contact details of a disaster anthropologist I met, which is like the coolest job title in the world, that has been using body mapping in a very similar context of how she's been using analog body mapping as a way of sharing with decision makers how disasters affect people on the ground in a deeply embodied way, and actually sharing that the kind of emotional and physical and psychological impact over time, that it's not just gathering these snapshots of people in one moment in time, but actually kind of longitudinal research using sort of arts-based methods. So yeah, you're speaking my language. It's really, really exciting.
Yeah, I would love to find out.
And I'm a big fan of Boomtown as well. I know a few narrative designers that have been working with them, so that's really cool.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, there's a research
thank
this
you. Thank you. I really want to thanks Sarah for all this amazing work. And if you want to get in touch, we have plenty of faculty and students here. So it would be great to create some collaboration. Thank you so much. I will let Eileen conclude and finish with our next talk coming up.
Yeah, thank you so much, Natalie, for bringing Sarah to us. This is so fascinating, and I'm happy to see so many students connecting their work and kind of sparking so many ideas here as well. So I don't think this is the last time we'll be talking with you, Sarah, which is wonderful. Yeah, I put a couple of links in the chat. There is another XR speaker on April 16th, Scott Patterson from Lenovo, who'll be talking about smart glasses. And then we also have a games speaker in April too. So that link will take you to both of those events. You can register on Eventbrite. And then also just want to mention Northeastern's programs in XR. We still are accepting applications for the Masters in Extended Realities for the fall semester. And then we also have a bachelor's in XR and performance. So to all of those who are interested in diving into these ideas and topics deeply, please look at our programs and join us here at Northeastern. So thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you, Natalie, for hosting. We will see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me. Have a lovely afternoon, everyone.
Bye-bye. Have a good evening.
Bye.